I opened my phone for the umpteenth time, 15 minutes since the sent timestamp, and stared at the single line I'd sent her. How was your day? No red receipt, no typing dots, nothing. That first morning I waited with a dull ache in my chest, and then the next morning, and the one after that. 5 days of silence and my heart curdled into confusion. 10 days in, it hardened into something sharper. This wasn't an accident. I remembered how easy we'd fallen into our routines, our accustomed goodbye hug before work, the same hoodie I wore every day, the quiet hum of the routine that kept us connected, even if belatedly. But today I noticed how much I'd stopped caring about appearances, how I'd let us both glide into complacency. 10 days of silence revealed that my passivity had given her permission to stop noticing me, and I decided I wouldn't be that man anymore. I felt that knot in my gut tighten as I replayed her last reply. One word. Okay. It was cold, dismissive. I could almost hear the yawning gap behind it, but I let it slide. I let our connection erode. And maybe I let her think she could ignore me. Fine, I thought. I'd start small. Something she'd notice but I'd barely acknowledge. The next morning, I didn't reach for my hoodie. I chose the crisp blue shirt she once said illuminated my eyes. Buttoned, ironed, silent. I caught a glimpse in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Slimmer, straighter posture, quiet determination in the line of my jaw. I exhaled. I was doing this for me, but I hoped she'd notice too. I left for work that day alone, as before, but walking felt different. I wasn't the ghost who drifted through our shared life. I felt like a man who'd decided where to stand. I hovered near the coffee table after work, pretending to read, but I had placed a framed photo there. Us, laughing on our first trip, the one where she wore that sundress I always loved. I left it face up, unconcealed. I didn't comment. I just let it sit. When I slipped back into bed later, that same blue shirt folded neatly on the chair, I felt the silence. But it felt less oppressive. I was no longer a passive echo in the void. I was a presence again, even if her silence remained. I started timing the changes. Every other morning, I washed my hair thoroughly and styled it more deliberately, shorter on the sides, combed back instead of that half-mussed look. Cordially, not showy, but enough to invite a second glance. I switched to the cologne she once said had a warm note she couldn't resist, subtle, earthy, promising. I washed the creaky old table in the living room, replaced the coffee maker filter, wiped off the film of dust. It looked the way a shared home should, a place someone cared enough to upkeep. Each evening, I made tea instead of turning on the TV. I pulled a single seat closer across from hers, placed the framed photo next to the tea. No comments, no prompting. It was a question in plain sight. Will you sit with me? I sorted the garage on Saturday, organized the boxes, hung her bike, cleaned the sweepings from the corner. I didn't mention it, but I caught myself noticing how full the space looked now, the extra square feet of potential, the kind of space you share when you imagine more to come. The playlist improvements came Sunday evening. I added her favorite acoustic songs and folk tracks she used to hum back and forth in the car. I printed the playlist name and the date, slid it onto the coffee table under the photo. Another quiet prompt. We had sounds she once loved here. That first note landed midweek. I found a crisp scrap of paper and pressed it between the pages of her book on the nightstand. I'm sorry I let things go slack. I think I lost us in routine. If I could, I'd start doing right by you again. No more, no less. No guilt, no demand. Just a confession laid bare. By day 10, I was measuring not texts or calls, but my posture. I wore dark denim and the blue shirt on a Thursday, and I headed out in the evening, just me, looking like a man who cared what he looked like to someone who might no longer care. 10 days of silence compressed my resolve. Hurt had given way to determination. I was building something tangible, new habits, a renewed presence. Whether she noticed or ignored, it didn't matter. I wasn't disappearing anymore, and I was ready for what came next. I looked at my phone again. No notification. I didn't need one. I had decided to reshape everything, and that could be the hardest change of all. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of my mug, as I reread our last exchange, her single, dismissive. Okay. It was small but seismic. That one word made a line between us, sharper than silence. I needed more than a pretty shirt and scented fragrance. I needed her to recognize a shift in me, but not by say so. So I let every gesture speak for the man I'd been and the one I'd chosen to become. I remembered how she'd always told me I left my hair in lazy disorder. So the next morning, I cut it shorter, no undercut, just neat, deliberate lines. I asked a barber I'd never used. It didn't shout change, but it commanded attention. In the mirror, I studied the transformation, cleaner, purposeful. I wore that new haircut under a light cologne, maple and cedar, subtle, pulled no stairs, but hanging around me like a quiet confidence. No one said anything, but she'd always prized emotional initiative. That day after work, I grabbed a wrench and knelt beneath the living room table. Every squeak and wobble I'd ignored for years got tightened. I paused only to catch how I sounded, tools clicking in measured rhythm. The table, once unreliable, now core steady. I didn't display it, I watched it silently from a corner. That table held our dinners, our coffee-weathered mornings, our shared weight. Fixing it was symbolic, but I only whispered thanks to myself, not her. That evening, I reconstituted our routine, only better. Tea instead of TV, warm mug in hand as I pulled a chair across from hers. I placed a framed photo of us on the table. Clean lines, her smile in the morning sun, no caption. When she entered, there was a flicker in her eyes, careful, cautious. I didn't speak, I just waited. That quiet emptiness at the table was tense, but I felt the room shift. Change, at its core, isn't loud. It's the unfamiliar breath it forces in a stagnant space. In the coming days, I moved through micro-movements. I left an apology note, not on the fridge with magnets, but hidden in her bedside book, the page marked. "I'm sorry I forgot to notice everything I had." That was my attempt to recalibrate what had drifted. The words weighed with intention, no drama, only humility. I reorganized the garage. I stacked her gardening tools against one wall, swept decades of dusty leaves, painted a strip of the floor fresh gray. Space became not just room for objects, but for possibilities. She'd complained once about the chaos, how I never finished what I started. I finished it now, and quietly closed the door behind me, letting the work speak without applause. On Sunday evening, I curated a playlist in her name, no dedication, just songs she loved, old folk ballads, soft lyrics, stories sung with time-worn voices. I printed the title across the top, "For You, When the World's Quiet." I put the printout beside the photo on our coffee table. My plan was unfolding, small gestures that couldn't be ignored all at once. The edges of my resolve sharpened. Each action was a strand in a web designed not to trap her, but to connect, again. And yet I didn't expect immediate transformation. Relationships twisted and bent under simplicity, posture, scent, sight lines, silence. Day 13. I sat upright as usual, shirt crisp, cologne in place. She emerged from the bedroom. Our eyes met. She didn't look away. Instead, she paused, as though scanning me. How had 10 days hardened into 17 layers of difference she couldn't yet name? Her voice, when she spoke, was low. "Are you okay?" That question was a tremor in our fortress of quiet. The tension wasn't old wounds or fresh tears. It was the unknown between us, charged and alive. I set my tea down slowly, meeting her gaze with measured calm. "I'm different," I said. No plea, no accusation, just a statement. My tone even, but all the contained gravity of someone who had tuned broken lines back into music. She looked past me, not angry, not sad, curious, unsettled, rattled by an unfamiliar solidity. She sank into the chair across from me. The chair I'd pulled forward. She didn't smile, she just sat. And in that moment, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt poised, waiting for something new to unfold. I spent the next 3 days orchestrating each shift with quiet precision, layering changes so she couldn't ignore the pattern, even if she didn't yet grasp the design. First, I folded my hoodie and placed it in the closet. It stayed there, forgotten. Instead, I polished off my look, slim-fit jeans, structured jacket, the crisp shirt I'd begun wearing, one notch higher each morning, not for anyone's approval, but to command my own reflection. I started with my hair. Wednesday, the new barber trimmed off the last vestiges of complacency, giving me a sharper silhouette. Thursday, I wet-combed it before heading out, no longer shirtless in the bathroom light, but styled, intentional. It felt like reclaiming presence in the world, one lock at a time. She noticed first in the way the sunlight hit my jawline at breakfast, then in the scent drifting from the hallway, a warm bass note of cedar and tobacco, the one she once traced a finger through on my neck. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. But I could feel her gaze searching. Friday, I unclogged the sticky drawer in the kitchen that had bothered me for weeks. I replaced the filter in the air purifier and wiped the kitchen counters until the reflection of the morning sky peeked back. I didn't make a show of it, but I walked through the space afterward as though I owned it again, with the confidence of someone who only dusts when he intends to stay. Saturday morning, I sorted the garage. I moved boxes to the back, cleaned the floor, even replaced the broken bulb in the overhead light. I left the door to the storage room slightly ajar, a hint of effort she might investigate. That afternoon, I reached out to our mutual friend, Angela, the one she used to say could always make us laugh when things seemed gray. I invited her over under the guise of just catching up, knowing this would signal a recalibration of our social world, too. She arrived, sent a quick wave to my wife standing by the sink, and the air subtly shifted. Angela's presence reminded us both of a different time, when laughter was casual and the distances between us far shorter. Later, I organized our stack of shared books on the coffee table shelf, making space for a book she'd mentioned months ago but never placed with care. I slipped a marker in the page that spoke about living fully, and I left it there, spine facing outward. I also updated the playlist on the stereo. I added her favorite folk singer, and one that had made her laugh in the car years ago. I printed a new cover, Sunday Evenings Made for Us, and propped it beside the photo I'd left 8 days earlier. 3 artifacts now. A photo, a playlist, a marker in a book, 3 silent invitations she had to acknowledge, or continue to ignore. Sunday evening, I brewed tea again and sat across from her, exactly as before. I didn't ask about the silence. I didn't demand attention. I just brought attention. She paused for a moment before extending her hand to lift the playlist cover, her fingers brushing the paper. I watched her thumb linger over the title. She didn't look at me yet. She was deciding whether to meet this changed presence. The game was set. I had pulled each piece into place: appearance, scent, space, social world, shared memories, rearranged the board without announcing strategy. And as she sat there, fingers on that playlist, the distance between us felt neither hostile nor warm, but taut with possibility. I folded my hands in front of my mug and waited. I'd started this with a single question: how was your day? And 10 days of silence. Now, 13 changes in, the question had transformed. She was awake to the pattern. Next, I'd let her speak. I woke on day 14 with an unfamiliar sense of anticipation. Not hope, exactly, but a measured readiness. Her question the night before, "Are you okay?" had opened a door, and by midday, it felt like a shifting perimeter rather than a breach. That morning, I changed our evening rhythm again, moved dinner back to the kitchen table, lit a single candle at its center, not to be romantic, but to signify care. When she emerged, she paused in the doorway, her eyes tracking the glow. Nothing more than a subtle invitation, but it carried weight. I remained silent, letting gentle light fill her moment of uncertainty. She sat but didn't speak. I poured water. My hand gripping the glass was steady. I felt calm, not anxious. She cleared her throat. "This is different, I agreed, lifting my eyes after a sip. "Better than how it was." The rake of surprise that flickered across her face showed these 13 changes were doing their work. But I also sensed a new tension, the tension of accountability. She couldn't ignore me anymore, and that unnerved her more than she'd let on. Later, I saw her checking our shared calendar. On it, I'd added a tentative weekend outing, loosely titled Saturday Adventure, a nod to an earlier plan we'd cancelled long ago. She lingered over it, thumb hovering above the screen. I didn't speak while she decided how to name it. That afternoon, I called Angela. The tone of the call was casual, but I felt like a project manager marking a milestone. Angela would join us next weekend. Not a surprise, but a clear signal that our social circle was reactivating, on my terms. By evening, I found her in the living room, browsing the photo on the table. I watched from the hallway as she flipped it around, gazed at our faces. I didn't interrupt, just let her private moments stay private. Her silence was different now, not absence, but consideration. I realized then that her distance had evolved into uncertainty. She was no longer ignoring me, she was recalibrating how to respond. In that moment, I felt the weight of real change. My actions had disrupted inertia. But with that disruption came new risk. She might leave our dynamic on hold entirely, waiting to see where I'd move next. That night, she left the dinner table quicker than usual, retreating to the study. I heard the soft click of the door. I poured an extra cup of tea and placed it beside my chair, across from the playlist and photo. I didn't chase her. I'd made space for whatever came next, whether reconnection or quiet withdrawal. Hours later, she returned. No apology, no explanation. She only went to the bookshelf, pulled out the novel I'd bookmarked with my apology. She unfolded the note. "I'm sorry I forgot to notice everything I had." She read it quietly, then looked up. Her expression was complex, something between remorse and recognition. She slid the book back into place, and our eyes met briefly. No words, but in that pause I felt the stakes rising beyond silence. This was more than rekindling old feelings, it was reclaiming shared agency over the relationship. And now she would have to decide if she wanted to walk through, or turn away. Late that night, I checked the calendar notification. Saturday adventure, tentative. She hadn't deleted it. She just hadn't confirmed. Her silence now lived in ambiguity, not absence. And as I lay awake, I realized this was the pivot. Silence had become suspense. Tomorrow, everything would shift again. And I was ready. I uncovered the twist on Monday, when Angela dropped by unexpectedly after work. She lingered over the tea I'd prepared and then leaned closer, voice quiet and steady. "She said you seemed lost," Angela confided, tracing the rim of her cup. "You weren't yourself. You looked exhausted." So she stopped replying. She thought maybe you'd stopped showing up, even to yourself. Her words hit me with more force than any silence. It wasn't apathy. It was fear. She had pulled away out of worry, not anger. A new fracture emerged. I hadn't just faded. I'd changed in ways even I hadn't noticed, and that made her uncertain, defensive, disconnected. That afternoon, I replayed Angela's revelation in the low light of our living room. I walked past the playlist and photo and found the note I'd left. "I'm sorry I forgot to notice everything I had." That wasn't a casual apology. It was a confession I'd become impotent as part of a pair. And she'd recoiled not because she didn't care, but because I'd vanished. I felt something shift inside me. The changes I'd made, appearance, home, habits, were never just signs to her. They were for me, to wake up, to re-inhabit my own life. And if she'd stepped back out of concern, then my move forward was about reclamation, not reconciliation. I adjusted the weekend plan, renamed it. Rediscover Us? You decide. A small recalibration from Saturday Adventure. Not a demand, but an offer. I laid the playlist and photo in the center of the kitchen table, with a post-it, no agenda. Just presence. Later I texted her. "I learned something today." No explanation. I watched the message sit unread, but my hand didn't shake. I was reporting, not pleading. Tuesday morning came with a clarity I hadn't expected. I showered, combed my hair, and stood in front of the mirror. I spoke to the reflection, "You're here now." And she watched. I found her at breakfast, coffee-stained mug in hand, eyes slightly apprehensive. I hadn't said much, but inside there was a pivot. I wasn't chasing communication. I was inviting connection on terms I'd set. She looked up. "You learned something?" I nodded. "I realized I faded first, and when I disappeared, you stopped answering because you thought I wasn't here anymore." I paused, tracing the rim of my own mug. "I needed to change, for me. Not in case you came back." That landed heavily. She blinked, as though deciding whether this was a confession or a resignation. "So, what now?" "I stay." My voice was even. "Here. If you want to meet me." I turned so she could see each subtle change. The haircut, the shirt, the tea, the photo, the grass-trimmed garage behind me reflected in the backyard. "The invitation's open." She looked down, then back up. Uncertainty gleamed in her eyes. She hadn't replied, but she lingered. That afternoon, I saw the garage door had been slightly nudged open, her silent sign of engagement. I stepped inside, spotted her footprint on the freshly swept floor. I tapped the photo frame. Later, I learned she'd booked the weekend plan, but only after windows had closed on the booking. She'd gone solo. I noticed the refund slip crumpled in the bin, a pattern of wanting to follow, but holding back. In that instant, I understood. The power had shifted. She was responding under my pacing, and that pained her more than before. That night, a text lit the screen. "When do you want to talk?" I imagined every possible tone rolled into those words. Then I typed back, "Today." No changes this time. Then I locked my phone and lay back, scanning the ceiling. Hurt still throbbed, layers of absence, fear, and fractured trust. But beneath it was something steadier, resolve. I couldn't predict what her talk would bring. But I had made one promise I'd kept, to stay, fully present. I closed my eyes. The night no longer carried the weight of anticipation. It carried purpose. I told her I was ready to talk. Today! And by mid-morning, she stood at the threshold of the kitchen. No words yet, just the quiet weight of a question in her posture. I'd cleared the table that morning. No playlist, no photo, no notes. Everything was in its place, but muted. I'd removed the prompts so that what happened now would come from us, not my choreographed invitations. I led her to the table and pulled out 2 mugs. The steam curled between us like an olive branch. I sat, measuring my breathing until my heart's rapid thrum calmed. She settled across. Her eyes searched mine, guarded, wary, hopeful. I took the first sip of tea slowly. You asked when I wanted to talk. I paused, meeting her gaze. My voice remained even. I've shown you who I am now. Not the routine husk I'd fallen into. I set the mug down. Tonight the table's empty because I want this to be our moment, unframed. She dipped her chin toward the table, measuring whether it was a challenge or a surrender. So, about us. Her voice shook ever so slightly, the taut control in her tone unraveling just enough. Yes. I let the word hover. I didn't soften it. I changed, for me. I learned that I'd lost myself in the sameness. That scared you into silence. And the answer isn't about reversing what's done, it's about deciding what comes next. She exhaled, lips parting then pressing together. I didn't answer because I was frightened. Not that you were gone, but that I'd lost you. Her vulnerability cracked open something tighter inside me, relief laced with regret. I traced the rim of the mug. I'm still here. I paused. But only if you show me your next step. Not because I changed back, but because you choose to meet me here, with presence, honesty. She looked at her hands. I don't know. I've been holding back, afraid I'll shatter the progress you've made. I leaned forward, still calm, leaning into resolve. Then don't hide. Let the silence break around us. Talk to me. Or sit in my silence. But be here. She nodded slowly, the tension draining. She lifted her mug, her hand trembling. I want to try, she said. Not more. Not less. And there we sat, 2 mugs before us, the kitchen softly echoing presence, not burden. No shouting. No blame. Just a man who'd rebuilt himself, and a woman who'd chosen to return. I let her speak first. She spoke of fear, of guilt, of longing hollowed out by routine. I responded with clarity, not defense, not blame, but truth. I stopped noticing. You stopped seeing me. But I'm here again. She met my eyes, tears quiet on her cheeks. I want to remember you, she whispered. I didn't rush to comfort. I simply reached across the table. My hand landed on hers steady. Then let's talk, starting now. We spent the next hour unpacking months of neglect, moments we'd both allowed to pass. I stayed calm, asking questions, listening, articulating my own regrets. No shouting, no dramatics, just clarity and controlled emotion. When we stood to leave the table, I kept my grip on her hand. I didn't promise that everything would be perfect. I didn't apologize for my changes, they were necessary. But I offered something deeper, presence. That had to be enough for now. By the time she left the room, I felt the gravity shift. For the first time in weeks, we were aligned, not drifting. We'd spoken about what had broken us, and taken the first honest steps to piece it back together. I sat back down at the table, looking around. The kitchen was ordinary again. No framed photos, no playlists. Just the aftermath of 2 people who had started to talk. And for the first time in a long time, that felt significant enough. I watched her retreat down the hallway, our hands still lightly clasped. The air between us felt fragile, a new pattern beginning but far from steady. I stood at the kitchen threshold for a long moment, absorbing the gravity of what we had just done. No grand gestures, no sweeping promises, just 2 voices unmuted for the first time in weeks. That evening, the ripple effects began. Friends started noticing soon after. A text came from Lauren, our neighbor. You seem different. Happy even. Is everything okay with you too? No explanation from me, just a measured smile and a quiet truth. Yes, things were shifting. Meanwhile, I sensed her distance in group chats, where she remained silent even as others celebrated small talk. The balance had pivoted, and she was still catching up. That weekend she arrived, late Friday afternoon, at the storage unit I'd been reorganizing. The door stood open. A faint light revealed every tool neatly placed, boxes lined like actors awaiting rehearsal. She stepped in, her heels echoing gently. I waited, not guiding, as she took it all in. She stopped before a shelf, touched a tool's handle. It was quiet, deliberate, her presence re-entering spaces I'd claimed back. She wasn't stealing back control. She was learning the new contours of what I'd built. I studied her from a few feet away, liked the way her eyes reflected a mix of remorse and recalibration. She turned and met my gaze, a question suspended in the air. Then, slowly, she nodded. Saturday came with a hum of resumed routine, but with new friction. She'd booked the Rediscover Us weekend, but when our reservation window passed, she didn't follow through. Instead, I found the booking manager's text chain flagged on her phone. I went ahead without you, sorry. But no one told me directly. I discovered it on our shared calendar. Rediscover Us? Solo. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with the weight of that word, solo. She never asked how I felt. She didn't say, I booked it alone. She acted in a way that shadowed possibility with fear, making a move without waiting for me. I understood. We were still circling one another. But I also realized that this realm of possibility had rules again, rules I would set. On Sunday evening, I stepped into that weekend space alone. I sat on the edge of a bed we'd once shared on trips. I closed my eyes and breathed deep. Did it hurt? Yes. It felt like being reminded of loneliness beside someone entering, but not entering with me. But I wasn't furious. I wasn't running. I was recalibrated. She had started talking again, and now I'd make her see what that meant, beyond silence. That night, as she knocked softly on our bedroom door, I didn't leap to let her in. She stood outside, voice hesitant. I wanted to sleep here. Thought maybe. Her words trembled. I nodded once, and opened the door. No words. Just space. She slipped in, gently traced the edge of the bed, and sat at the foot, tentative, respectful. I lay down some distance away. I kept calm and steady. After a moment, I asked softly, Why solo? She swallowed. I was afraid, if I asked you'd say no, that I'd miss my chance. That quiet confession clarified everything. She was responding, but with fear, not trust. And trust was built brick by brick, not gesture by gesture. I nodded. Then next time ask, I said before I drifted to sleep. My voice was final, kind, resolute. The next morning, I woke to find the weekend plan deleted. No refund slip in the bin. She'd done it herself. I felt surprise, but not relief. Relief would come later, after clarity. I noticed she'd left the note I'd tucked into her book on the nightstand for the second time. I'm sorry I forgot to notice everything I had. Face up. Clean, echoing acknowledgement. Later that day, I came down to the living room. She was there, sitting, watching me. I sat beside her and reached out. Her hand slid into mine, not because of a choreographed moment, but because trust had begun to resettle. She spoke first, quietly. I want presence, not perfection. I nodded. And I want trust, not fear. She leaned her head on my shoulder, a slow exhale. I let my arm fall around her. We sat like that for a long while, two people accepting that presence and trust would need time to take root again. Outside, the phone lit up with a text I didn't check. Inside, everything was real. No grand closure, but a return, a constant work in progress. The wall between us wasn't gone, but it had a doorway now. She had texted hours ago. When do you want to talk? I said. Today. No changes this time. We had talked. I showed up. She walked through the door. And now the real work, quiet, steady, imperfect, had begun.